Coming out. It's going to be a great conversation, but also some beautiful visuals, because this is really a book all about the melding of words and pictures. And so to that end, we're going to jump right in. All right. We get the pictures going.
I've been given a device to operate, so let me see.
Oh, it's down here.
Kya baat hai? All right. Let me get organized here for a second. So, let me think. मनोज जी मैं पीछे जा रहा हूँ एक वो जो न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स वाली चीज आई थी 1 मिनट के लिए हाँ there it is. What happened was during the pandemic people started saying, I mean those people who were not making sourdough bread or had found other productive activities, they started saying that you could be keeping a diary, you know, that this is the first draft of history because you are living through the times, and if you keep a record of it, it becomes something that other people will come back to. And I was thinking, well, one of my children was rather small, and I said, you're not going to school, let's have some goals. What goal do you have? He said, Dad, I would like to have abs. So I said, okay. So listen, for 1 minute every day, we are going to do planking. And as a sort of a bargaining chip, I said, we will also do one painting every day, and we'll write one paragraph every day. So we were doing that. 2 children at that time, dono aadmi, we would do a little bit of writing, a little bit of drawing. They got bored of the drawing and let it go. But I did not. And this book came out of it by painting every day. So the New York Times, in its helpful way, in the magazine, they carried out a thing called How to Keep a Journal. And I also cut this out, and I was taking my students to London the following semester, and I sent this to them, and I said, you have to keep a journal. So, Maeve, since you encouraged me to start going with that, so that's, shall I just move to the next one, and then you can ask me?
Sure.
Acha. This is from an article by Teju Cole, my friend, and that is the line I was trying to quote to you. If journalism is the first rough draft of history, this is what someone has said, that journalism is the first draft of history, then perhaps a journal, I'm saying, perhaps a journal is the first draft of literature. Does that make sense to you? Well, just to wake them up, because it's 10 o'clock in the morning, let's ask them to raise their hands if they keep a journal. Okay, not bad. Next year, in December, they are bringing out a sequel to this. It's called The Blue Book. So when I come back next year, I expect everyone to raise their hands when I ask this question. Okay? Is it clear? Because I think everyone should do it. Not because you want to be necessarily writers. You just become more conscious of what divides your Tuesday from your Thursdays, etc., etc. Asha, just because we're talking about keeping memory alive, I should share one memory. The last time I was on this stage, I was talking to Kiran Desai. I don't know whether Sanjoy remembers this. I was talking to Kiran Desai, and someone asked, what do you, it was a question about imperialism, and what do you think about, what is the contribution of English, of the English to either society or literature in India? And then the discussion somehow came to Shashi Tharoor. And I said, oh, there's a connection there. The gift of colonization to India. Okay, Shashi Tharoor is, well, he's now also a member of parliament. He's also a writer. He's a great friend of the JLF. And some people think he's handsome. He also has this habit of doing like this and speaking in an accent that makes you think he is Jordan, he's like Lord Mountbatten's nephew. So I did, sitting on this stage, at this chair, I did say that one of the great gifts of imperialism was the accent that Sashi Tharoor now has. Anyway. So, Maeve, what should we do?
Okay, let's go back to the beginning of pictures.
Okay.
And why you talked there about really starting to paint and draw pictures with your children during COVID, but you're a very good artist, and I know we'll have some pictures in just a bit, and you can see them in this book. But I'd love your thoughts on the connection between pictures and text. You wrote an article in The Atlantic a couple of years ago saying writing should be a visual art, and saying picture books aren't just for children. Wondering if we can have a more complex dialogue between art and narrative. So why did you want to do a picture book, essentially?
Should have drunk more coffee. Why did I? Yeah. It's because of influences. One writer I very much admire is John Berger. He was a British writer and critic. And when I was on a book tour for Immigrant, Montana, I visited Michael Ondaatje in Canada, and he had this book of Berger's on his shelf. It was called Bento's Sketchbook. And Berger would read this philosopher, and then he would do drawings. And I thought that was something that was just something uninhibited about it. Now, why I was doing it? I think I'm not here, I think having produced a dozen books, I think of myself as a writer, so I wanted to really challenge myself to do something I'm not good at. You're very kind, Maeve, to say that I'm a good artist, but really, I am an amateur, and I wanted to feel freed into doing something I was bad at. And to do that every day was a wonderful thing to just feel the liberation of doing. That you don't have to care. The society burdens you with expectations and makes you think that you can only do something that you're good at. But actually, why not do something that you're bad at? By which I don't mean that if you're a bad cook, you shouldn't burden your spouse with this idea of, no, darling, you stay, I'll cook tonight. Whenever my wife says that, I say, no, baby, I love you, let me cook. You know what I'm saying? So you shouldn't do that. But what I'm saying is, you should believe, everyone should, that your creativity should not have limitations on it. And you should indeed do, pottery, writing, drawing, whatever. And I found it liberating, I'm saying. The picture book, I thought, was just liberating in that sense of doing something that I'm not good at and feeling secure enough to keep doing it every day. The other thing, though, I should also say a little bit more seriously, is that drawing allows you to be more attentive. David Hockney has a line that photographs do not really show you what the world looks like. To know what the world looks like, you have to draw it.
Well, actually, that brings me perfectly to my next question. And you say in the book the difference between photography and painting. You mentioned there David Hockney, but yourself, you're saying that a drawing slows you down because a photograph is very easily printed and reproduced, but a drawing is a very deliberate act and it slows you down. Yeah. And you say you do it to slow jam the news. And I know, we're talking about COVID, and that's actually quite a big part of the book. The onslaught of negative news, the onslaught of bad news. Talk a little bit about how art maybe helped you navigate that, albeit you're a journalist, so it's hard for you to get away from it when you're also writing about it too.
Yes. I'll hold up the microphone in a minute. I'm trying to look for... there's a line in my novel about slow jamming the news. Because we are talking about slowing it down, I think you guys should be patient and just... Oh, sorry. You should be patient as I look for this passage. Don't think that advertising dollars are being lost. Instead, become conscious of your breathing. And breathe out. Talking about breathing in and breathing out, a Russian colleague of mine invited me for dinner one night, and I went, and he said, "You found it?"
Yeah.
Oh my God, Maeve, you're the best. How she quickly found that paragraph. That's amazing. Listen, so a Russian colleague invited me for dinner, and then he said, Amitava, this is Russian yoga. And then he poured vodka, he put a bit of salt here, and he said, take a breath, drink it, and then lick the salt. This is Russian yoga. I have to say, I appreciated Russian yoga much more than Indian yoga. Okay, listen, to answer Maeve's question, why is it important to slow things down? So here's a little paragraph from my novel, A Time Outside This Time. Why must one slow jam the news? Because all that is new will become normal with astonishing speed. You will go to visit your father and discover that he has pledged himself to the service of the great leader. Or you will visit your friend's house, and it will take a minute or more to realize that a meeting is underway and now everyone is looking at you with suspicion. You notice one fine day that all the signs on the road have changed. Your town has a new name. Dogs have grown fat on flesh torn from corpses lining the street where you grew up. The beautiful tree outside your window is dead, has been dead for some time, and has in fact just now burst into flames. Does that explain anything?
That also reminds me of what you were saying about the need for us to journal, to pay attention to our surroundings, how things change, because, and I want to get into memory as well, and the need for us to journal, to keep those memories alive, not just for ourselves as a public record as well. I mean, for you as a writer, yours are now in the public record, but the idea of how memory distorts, changes, morphs, and when we have a record of what happened, that can somehow maybe keep us on track, and maybe in a broader sense with the growth of misinformation, is this something that can help get us back into truth and reality?
Yeah. You know, Asha, maybe we could have that thing on the screen rather than our faces. And then I'll show you something to illustrate a point. Yesterday night, I was walking back from the reception to the hotel. And I could really feel the hurt in my left knee. And I was very conscious of that my knee was hurting. And I'm quite convinced that I could not remember, if I tried to at that time, that 20 years ago, I could be sprinting for the Delhi Transport Corporation bus, and nothing could prevent me from clambering onto that bus as even it caught speed. You know what I'm saying? Even the body that is so intimate to us, and its feelings, its experiences, they become remote as time passes. You forget things. That has been a constant theme in my thinking, that you forget even what is most closest to you. And so for me, journaling is a way of just trying to keep alive that sense of memory. As to the distortion, it's amazing how people are convinced that they remember something quite perfectly, but it's entirely false. We could all go out from this scintillating conversation, and if we could do an interview 10 minutes from now, 10 meters away, about what was said between you at a particular time, each one will have a different memory of it. Because even our memories are only other memories overlaid on the memories that we have experienced. And so too, the idea of the journal becomes one way of keeping one version of that reality alive. I mean, we have a science writer back there, Angela. If anything I say about memory seems wrong, just correct me. So, that's the idea.
I want to talk about your experience in the pandemic, and we started off with that. And
that's why I brought up that.
Yeah, perfect. And this is a perfect visual representation of the work that you were doing. And if you look closely, if you can see the background of the painting of this flower, is it a tulip? It's not just a piece of paper, it's actually a piece of newspaper. And you write about how you use newsprint as the vehicle for so much of your painting. And it really struck me in the pandemic postcards, that section of your book, some of these visuals. There was so much about the COVID deaths, the obituaries, and you were painting using those obits from COVID in the New York Times as a canvas, essentially. Yeah. Why did you do that? It struck me as essentially profound, and I'd love to just know more about your thought process.
Thank you. What happened was that, you will all remember this, the pandemic was raging, but spring had come. Flowers were blooming. You were limited to your home, but there were flowers outside, And I thought, should I draw the flowers? Because you're drawn to beauty, And I thought it would be wrong to simply draw the flowers. So I thought the New York Times had started publishing these obituaries. They had, started these reports. So what I would do is I would spread gouache in a way that would still keep some words like pandemic or COVID-19, and yet I would like to obscure it or in some ways give homage. So I said day 29, coronavirus diary. So this is day 29 of the lockdown as I was experiencing it. And every day I would do the same thing with that day's newspaper. So in the beginning, I don't know what you guys remember, but there wouldn't be obituaries of individuals, but after a while the paper had started doing that. And so here you can see am I answering your question?
Yes.
And also I want you to know that in the first paragraph there, while I was doing this, I was also writing a novel about the news, and I was deliberating about the news. And the World Health Organization had said that along with the pandemic, we were also experiencing what they called an infodemic. There was a spread of fake news about the virus itself, and about other things. So I thought, what is a writer's response during this time? How to think about the novel, which in its origin comes from news, or what is new, and also think about how we produce a sense of newness, that it is a critical sense of newness, an interrogated sense of newness. And so that novel was a reflection or a kind of a philosophizing about what should be the role of fiction during the time of fiction that is fake news. Because remember, there was someone who we will not be named on this stage, who was the president at that time in this country. And so it was like, don't laugh, because a friend of mine, actually, a very close friend of mine, who's a writer. In fact, I just quoted him when I was telling you about the first draft of literature. He said, I'm not going to read your novel because you have mentioned that person. But let that not forbid you from picking up that book.
Well, actually, you say in the Blue Book that art is also a space that is free of politics. And yet many artists, writers, visual artists, poets, are inherently political. So what do you mean by that? And can art be free of politics? Because when I look at that picture, well, the one that's up now or the one that we saw with the flower on the obituaries, I think they're inherently political. So what do you mean when you say art is a space free of politics?
I don't have a slide for this, but there's a drawing of an elephant, the back of an elephant in this, which covers the whole painting. And the lines next to it, my journal entry is, politics, especially after Trump, is like the elephant in the room in a poem by K. Ryan. What I should do is look for, I don't know, are you guys patient enough to Google for a poem called Elephant in, it's by K. Ryan. She says something like, the elephant in the room is so large that there is no space to talk about anything else. And there is a way in which politics, if we experience it powerfully, does not sometimes leave space for anything else. And so I think one of the ways in which a political artist must respond to this condition is always by thinking, how do we create a space that is actually, kya baat hai, oh my God. Alka, thank you. The elephant in the room. We are all participating. Art is also about community. She found that paragraph, Alka found the poem, Life is good. Everyone should move to Colorado. All right, the elephant in the room. It isn't so much a complete elephant as an elephant sense. Perhaps pillar legs supporting a looming mass beyond which it's mostly a guess. In any case, we manage with relative ease. There are just places in the room that we bounce off when we come up against, not something we feel we have to announce. Okay, here it is. The elephant in the room. The room is almost all elephant. Almost none of it isn't. Pretty much solid elephant. So there's no room to talk about it. You know, that sense. And I always think art should be a way of, even when something is so pressing on you, so urgent, how to create a space for something else. Just to be able to breathe and to be able to experience our humanity in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about digital technology a bit, because there was a story in here, and it was a story that you had read in the news about a woman in a nursing home, an elderly woman who died, and they found, I think, 40 voice notes that she had made to Alexa, talking to Alexa and asking Alexa, can you alleviate my pain?
Yes.
And it was just heartbreaking, because as you were heartbroken, but you know, and you write that you were heartbroken when you heard that story, as was I. It exemplified the loneliness, but also that intersection of technology as well. So I like you to talk about that, but I do want to talk about, when we talk about journaling, what's happening now with social media, where people are sharing every single aspect of their life on TikTok or Instagram. Does that count as journaling? Before we get to that, just talk a little bit about that story that I just shared and why you were so struck by it.
Yeah, I was just interested in collecting stories during the pandemic. How were people experiencing it? You know, in the same ways. Is that a peacock or is that technology?
It's a baby, is it?
Okay, it's a baby. In the same way as there would be a story, for example, about a man who was an scooter driver, auto rickshaw driver in India, with a leg that was damaged, unable to work, and his daughter taking him on a bicycle all across the burning plains of India. In that same way, there was a story from here, from the nursing, the people finding this body. And this old woman had left these 40 messages on Alexa. Alexa, take away this pain. I thought that was revealing of a society and of a moment. And I just wanted to record it. Now, as to whether people putting things on social media, I'm not opposed to thinking of that also as a form of journaling. In fact, my children, if they were to do it, I would feel kind of relieved that, okay, at least they're doing something. You know what I'm saying? Ki bhaiya Instagram pe chadha diya apni zindagi ko, or something. Wrote something on Instagram, presented something. That's good. I would only be horrified if they used AI to generate their journal, Like, AI, please write what I did. Today I was at the JLF. I heard a boring talk. Something. You know what I'm saying? That would hurt me a little bit. I think the opposition to new forms that will emerge in society all the time should not be fanatical. Instead, we should think of all of them partially also as opportunities. So, to invoke my friend Teju again, Twitter can be a cesspool of humanity. But on the other hand, this friend of mine started #Flower Report. And people from all over the world on Wednesdays would send out a picture of the flower they had in their gardens or in their homes. It became a wonderful way of collating and talking to people from all over. Instagram can be used to produce wonderful essays, I think. Little essays, especially essays that interact with the visual medium. So I'm not opposed to it. I think everyone should do it. Maybe we can do it right now,
Well, getting back to journaling, and we started with a slide of an article in the New York Times, how to journal.
Yes.
You as a writer, and also as somebody who teaches other writers. Now, you say that your journals, which you've been keeping for decades, they've helped you write your books. So is your advice to writers and the role of journaling? Is it just to literally get words out there, or is it a way to self-reflect, to observe? What is the connection between journaling and then, say, fiction writing?
You know, in Sally Rooney's novel, Oh Beautiful Life, Where Are You? There's a woman says to another woman that when I used to keep a daily journal, I would not only record my experiences, I would actually create experiences so that I could then write about them. So you could be at home sitting, and then you're thinking, you know what, I need to make a journal entry. Let me go out for a walk and see what I see. When I come back, I'll write down what I see. You know what I'm saying? So it becomes a way of generating experience. So that's my first advice, that you keep a journal, but keep a journal as a way of producing experience, of confronting life, of moving outward into the world as a way of recording something. Cool? Mm-hmm. The other thing I think I'd like to do, or I really like, especially, I don't know about the New York Times, but Indian newspapers, especially on page 3, are full of strange things, you know? All kind of revelations, intrigue, crime, you know? So I love to just make clippings, and even if I'm in India for 10 days, I collect a whole sheaf of things because it's just interesting. For example, a man and a woman had a child, 7 years old. The child went to a fair but did not return. 5 years later, they hear of another child in another village. This is in Bihar, which some of us are from, and it says, well, that person said that he was lost. And everyone says, this is not the child, this was not your child, but the father is convinced this is his child. Now, the father has a need for that child to come back. The mother says, this is not our child, but he comes back. And then the newspaper reports that this man has finally been charged with the crime of being an imposter. But he has been, for 25 years now, a child in that home. And the amazing tensions of this family. The mother not believing that this person is my child. The father entirely convinced that it is, or wanting to be convinced. What drama played out there? It's very intriguing. I mean, you don't need to be a writer to be thinking, wow, what happened? You know, how did life proceed behind those walls? That really intrigues me. So I want to propose that read newspapers and cut it out and stick it in your journal.
Well, for people who want to start journaling, I mean, how do you observe what you see that day? Do you say, just the facts, this is what I ate for breakfast, this is what happened later on, or is it diving and delving into your innermost thoughts? Because I think sometimes people feel a bit paralyzed. Or is it just observational? I mean, I suppose it could be everything, but what's your advice for people who've never done it?
Yeah. Maybe we can look at the slide and I'll tell you that story. Boss? Yeah. So here is, if you look at the quote-unquote painting or collage, I was reporting what I was seeing in the newspaper, but just that day I received a call from Florida where I had my first job. And there was a graduate student who used to call me only on my birthday, and I would call him back on his birthday. But this call was from someone else who said that his body had been found. And so I just wrote that down as my journal. So every day in our lives, things happen. The things are revealed to us, or there are conflicts, there are stories. I think we should write it down. That's all. You know, it's very simple. What is a narrative? There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. Not necessarily in that order. You know what I'm saying? And you have to do the same. You have to put it down. That's my advice.
Well, you mentioned in the Sally Rooney book, one of the protagonists used journaling and keeping a diary as a way to generate experiences. What about journaling as a way to help us understand and process emotions? You write a lot about grief, not just around the pandemic, but you share stories about when your mum died and the impact on your family. And then actually stories about people who had an encounter with an animal. There's a story about Ted Hughes who had a dead badger in his car.
Yes.
Share that, because that's interesting. But just this idea of grief, and then of course that story you just shared about the grad student, and you had this grief, and you shared this moment of grief with essentially a stranger who called you up to share the news, but you had this shared sense of grief. The way you write about grief in your book, it makes me think that journaling is a way to help you process
Yes. So let me go there. But first, let me say, for example, that I got that call from that woman who said that this graduate student friend of mine, who's now, must be 50, had died. And then the phone rang again. And I thought she was calling back. She had made except this was a obscene call. And I say, so I've recorded that on the next page. And I say it was a private number. It was a child's voice. No, yeah, see, I had forgotten this part, that it was a child's voice. The child must have learned at school or something, that you can make a call and say these words. Because I could tell it was a child. It was a child's voice on the other end. After some hesitation, the voice said something obscene, a sexual invitation. I was so full of sorrow and love, really, that my customary curses abandoned me. Instead, I found myself giving the kid calm advice. So I said something like, why are you doing this? It's not nice. Read a book. Go out. You don't make other people feel good when you make a call like this. I think my friend would have liked this story about the 2 calls. Goodbye, Tom. The quote on the other side, I had a little bird. His name was Enza. I opened the window and influenza. This was from a clipping I cut from the New York Times because it was reporting on the 1918 pandemic. So here I'm just demonstrating how those journals worked. About Maeve is entirely right. I think what writing allows you to do is, you have to set things down in order. Like a call came. During the call, I was told that my father was sick. I said this. Out of the chaos or the jumble of emotions, what you get is a little bit of order. So it helps you with grief. You are reducing chaos and the confusion of grief to something that is more orderly or settled. So that's how I feel about it. Does it free you from grief? No, but it gives you a certain sense of clarity. And maybe it sets your grief, it's an odd way of putting it, it takes it out of your heart and puts it out there, so that you have a little bit of a distance. So for example, when I went to India after getting a call that my mother was sick and my mother had died by the time I arrived, I saw her body on the ground floor of our house. And then when I went up, I saw that her slippers and her shoes and her walking stick was where they used to be. And when I went into her bathroom, I saw that there was a new bar of soap. And it occurred to me that that bar of soap must be the soap that she had last put there. And then I thought, because I always have a notebook with me, I took it out and I wrote this about the bar. It just became a way of, using that observation to both record what I was thinking about my mother and also set things at a little bit of a distance, because you then also become in part an observer. And so you're not engulfed by emotion, you're observing it. And I feel that's an important writerly exercise to do, although I'm putting it in a slightly detached way that way.
Can you tell the Ted Hughes
Oh, yeah. What happened was, my wife, whom I have unfairly described now as not a good cook, I won't say anything about her driving, but she did not do well with the driving tests in California when I was on a postdoc, and then she had a learning permit from Canada. And the folks in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania, thought that was a real license, so they gave her a license. So one might construe that she's a bit of a danger on the road. She hasn't hit a person yet, but there have been a few cars that have suffered from her skills. And then a poor deer. So when that deer thing happened, I did a little drawing, which is in the book. And I was telling Michael Ondaatje had written something, and I said, no, I've done this. Listen, this is what happened to a deer. And I wrote this, and I sent it to him, and he said, I have a story for you. And he said, and his story goes, you do have it on the page?
No, I have another paragraph.
Okay.
There was a man who was driving.
Yeah.
By police.
But I just want Michael's prose to come out here. Okay, dear friends, again, breathing exercises.
Yeah, I'll find out.
Acha, koi baat nahi. He said, a car was weaving in rural Dorset. And the cops stopped the car. The man was acting suspicious. He said something had happened, and he was still disturbed by it. So the cops asked the man to step out of the car. And they looked in his, in India they call it dicky, here, trunk. They looked in the trunk, and they found a dead badger. The badger had been hit 2 hours earlier, had died, and the man was still grieving. And Michael Ondaatje ended his note by saying, the man was Ted Hughes, the poet. So that was the little story. Listen, how are we doing in terms of time? When I saw that person approach, I thought...
We've got 5 minutes left before we take audience questions.
Okay, in that case, you'll have to allow me to read that little passage, which is a journal from my last visit to Boulder. Is everyone okay with that?
It's a wonderful little anecdote that might inspire us all for an afternoon trip.
Yes, it's a little early in the day for this kind of talk, but... All right. I have traveled to Colorado for different reasons over the years. And the drawing under which it appears is a visit to, in Denver, the Botanical Garden and poppies. 2 years ago, I went to a literature festival there. Although, as you will understand, if you read further, the details are hazy. In Colorado, you can buy substances that are not legal in my own state, New York. This was at that time. Now things, thankfully, have changed. I went to a marijuana dispensary on the evening of my arrival. The next day, after my session, I went on a hike. With me was Suketu Mehta, who, in addition to being a great nonfiction writer, has the uncanny ability to turn into a guide. Whether you're with him in Nagpada in Mumbai, a favela in Rio, a part of Queens, New York, or as I was to discover this time, the wilderness of Colorado. Our companion was Kiran Desai, who, apart from being one of the finest writers of fiction, possesses a rare mix of intelligence and sweetness. There is no one like her, and I love her very much. Sabrina Dhawan, who wrote the script for one of my favorite movies, Monsoon Wedding, was also to come, but alas, she had to attend her own panel with a name like From Script to Screen, or maybe it was From Screen to Being Queen. I don't remember. Sabrina is a champion Antakshari player, and I always feel like Porus being brought before Alexander. Tumhare saath main kya saluk karoon? After we had scaled great heights, or what appeared to me to be great heights, I took out from my pocket what I had purchased at the dispensary. Kiran said no. She adopted the classic posture of a writer. She would be an amused, non-judgmental observer. Suketu, close to Mahatma Gandhi as a Gujarati, chose more dramatically to see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. I had to indulge my tastes alone, but, writing is a profession that prepares you for solitariness. My companions were patient. I felt good. And then, very good. I didn't want to come down from the mountain. I wanted Uber to pick me up. Alas, no roads. Not even a single bar on the phone to make a call. We wandered down. It was already getting dark. And then we came across an establishment that offered drinks. A car arrived. Back in civilization, I bought a bottle of bourbon for a folk musician from Rajasthan who had performed at the festival. I don't know if some of you remember or have been here before. It was Chuge Khan. I had heard him complaining about not having real liquor to drink. I didn't know his name, but I wanted to thank him for his art. He was confused when I gifted him the bottle. We parted. Near midnight, the phone in my hotel room rang. It was the musician. He had found my name by looking for my photograph in the festival program. Would I please meet him for a minute? I put on the lights, and if I remember right, some clothes. One look at the musician, and I realized that the bottle of bourbon had been consumed. His hands were folded together, and he now opened them. There was a small bottle of ether. Ether is perfumed oil. Is that correct? Essential oil. There was a small bottle of ether sitting in his palm. He said he wanted to give me a gift too. I thanked him, but felt I needed to show my appreciation. Quickly, I removed the bottle's cap and dabbed my wrist with that perfume from Rajasthan. At times, I feel I can still smell it.
Well, we can take questions, so I think we have a microphone, and we'll get a microphone over to you right here. Okay, perfect.
Oh, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. I remember reading about, or maybe you talking about the importance of walking or taking daily walks as integral to your writing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so in that writing class that I teach, I say to my students, you have to be modest in your ambitions. Don't think you have to write 20 pages or anything like that. I ask them to write 150 words every day and to walk mindfully for 10 minutes. And my definition, and this kind of definition in Boulder, Colorado will go down well. To walk mindfully means that when you walk, you imagine that with every step you're planting lotuses in the ground or flowers on the ground. You know what I'm saying? So just that walk for 10 minutes. And so even when they come for office hours, I say to my students, if there isn't a line, I say, let's go, let's walk mindfully. And I make them walk with me in silence for 10 minutes. And then I talk to them about their problems. I really think walking. I discovered this from a book called New Journalism, in which various journalists are interviewed, and one journalist says that whenever he's stuck, he goes for a run. This is Lawrence Wright, who won a Pulitzer for his book about the Twin Towers. And so when I go to walk in my college's farm, I always carry an index card, and I steal these golf pencils that are for evaluations from my office, and I keep one, and always some idea will come. So you should try it this afternoon. Go and walk by the river close by, and think of a problem, and then something will come to you. I guarantee that.
If you have a question, just
Or
raise
thoughts,
your hand.
comments. The lady at the back has a question.
Thanks. I was listening to your podcast with Amit Verma, The Seen and the Unseen, and there you had shared an anecdote on feeling home. I'm not sure if you remember it or not. Like it was a story about a Muslim man, I think. Just in case you know that, it would be, like if you remember that anecdote, it would be great to share it with the audience here.
You know, what I remember is, maybe it will come in a second. What I remember is this line that I recited for him, and I was afraid that I would forget it when I was talking to him. These are two lines from a Hindi poem, and I'll also read the translation. It is by a Patna poet. Patna is where I'm from, and the poet had written, I think it's about home, it's about mothers. It said, and since you're holding a child, I thought I should read this out to you. रेल, हर भले आदमी की एक रेल होती है, जो माँ के घर की ओर जाती है, सीटी बजाती हुई, धुआं उड़ाती हुई. In my bad translation, it says, every good man has a train that goes towards his mother's house, sounding its whistle, blowing smoke. I'm trying to think about the Muslim man. There was one story. Yes. I was finishing the book when Trump visited India, and there was a riot on the same day. And a lot of Muslim homes were burnt. And the poem that had come to, I had done a painting about Delhi, and then the news item that I had clipped out from was, I think from Washington Post, where one man had said that in a Muslim man's house, someone had come and killed all the pigeons. And I had asked the question, were these Muslim pigeons? And then another Muslim man said that he had run away, and then he had gone back to look for his brother's bones. And the poem I had translated, because these burning of homes always is such a tragedy. and why don't people get it, was from Bashir Badr. The two lines are, लोग टूट जाते हैं एक घर बनाने में, तुम तरस नहीं खाते बस्तियां जलाने में. People go broke in building a home, and you remain unmoved as you burn down whole neighborhoods. Maybe this is what I would have said. I don't know. But if I remember what I had said, I'll get in touch. How are we doing in terms of time?
We have about 5-10 minutes left. Any other questions? I have a question, actually. I think it was in that
भाई
portion
अगर slide अगर फिर से दिखा सके, हाँ.
that you were reading from. You talk about loss of mother tongue.
Yes.
And when I was kind of struck by the theme of grief, of course, is an essential part of the human experience, but you write so much about grief and loss in the book, but the loss of language. And you have these lovely sort of little anecdotes of getting taxis in New York City and being able to speak, in your mother tongue with different taxi drivers. Talk a little bit about that, about language, the loss of mother tongue, when, so much of your writing has been about the immigrant experience, and language is such an integral part of that.
Yeah. When I came to this country, which was many years ago, the only letters I wrote in Hindi were to my grandmother, so that someone in the village could read it out to her. Although the language in which we spoke was a dialect, Bhojpuri. But when she died, that letter writing stopped. And then I felt that I was losing touch with that language too, yeah? Because I was not writing in that language anymore. And so I always thought it wasn't so much the loss of a place, but it was the loss of a tongue that was the most proper reflection of this immigrant experience. But I also have always believed that new words are being coined on the streets of your hometown every damn day. In the same way as you see around you, if my American son basically demands, hey dad, can you make Korean fried chicken? And I make it, and I said, hey, is it okay? And he says, it's bussin'. It's a new word for me. I was like, what is bussin'? It's bussin', it's bussin'. All right. So in the same way as these American kids are inventing language, surely on the streets of Patna, new words are being born, And that is another deprivation. I feel that as a loss, that what I am writing then is a language and an imagination that is remote from the actuality on the streets, yeah? So my son, who was born in New York in 2009, doesn't speak Hindi, but I have taught him the first few lines of the Kishore Kumar song, Hum to mohabbat karega, duniya se nahi darega. I'll dare to love, will have no fear of the world. I have explained to him the meaning of the words, but sometimes he asks in English, Baba, what does dunya mean? It means the world, beta, the world that I have lost, the world of Hindi, So I was talking to Shesh and saying, his name is Shesh, I was saying to him this morning, Shesh Sakushal. It's a phrase that some people will recognize because you ended your letters by saying everything, Shesh Sakushal, everything else is all right, And just the encounter with him this morning reminded me that was a phrase that was so common in my childhood but I have not used it, right? Now I use things like LOL. Shit. All right. So, yeah.
And what has your experience then been able to speak to, when you have these random encounters, often in a taxi in New York? I mean, what is that like for you to be able to communicate in your mother tongue?
Yeah, it's great. In fact, when I went, In fact, the lady at the back asked about this podcast, and it was this fellow insists on doing a 2 to 3 hour conversation. He says otherwise he cannot get to the truth. And I'm like, no, man. But thankfully time passed. And during that conversation, we spoke in English and in Hindi, in a mixed tongue. A couple of people complained about it. But I exploit every chance I can to use that mixed tongue, because you don't want to let go of your other identities that have been so integral to your making, you know. But at the same time, it's not just a loss. You have to celebrate the plurality that comes through immigration too. You know, ROOTS gives way to ROUTES, you know, roots and roots. That's something to celebrate. It just opens up multitudes of worlds, and I want to celebrate that all the time. It shouldn't always be about, oh, I lost my homeland. It should be about how you discovered more homelands, you know, or as Rushdie says, imaginary homelands.
What language do you dream in?
You know, it's a sad fact of my life that I can never remember any of my dreams, so I don't know. Just last night, because of this whole time difference, you know, I went home and I woke early, and I was dreaming something about my son complaining about something, and I tried to remember it. So I can't answer that question truthfully. But I know that people are often asked that question, and it's supposed to reveal your secret self or something. Oh no, I was the most uninteresting, boring subconscious self.
Oh, we have another question. Do you have a microphone?
I'll show a couple more slides while the question is being asked. Now, Alka has actually got a podcast, and we had said that we were going to have a conversation, but she's going to try out all those questions first here. or you'll have to come up with new questions then on your podcast.
No.
No. By the way, I would do these drawings and leave them on my office door during COVID. Yeah. Today's office hours are at Sunset Lake. That's the lake on our campus, and I would wait there rather than in my office. Yeah, go ahead, Alka.
Yeah, so this is not part of my podcast.
Yes.
So you said something really beautiful about your sense of loss when you lost the connection with language with the passing of your grandmother. But at the same time, how living as an immigrant can also be very enriching. So when you were talking about you talking in your mother tongue to taxi drivers, is that what you were saying just now?
There's some stories in the book about that.
So my parents live in New Zealand, and I go to spend my winter holidays with them, and it's a very boring experience. You know, like after the initial euphoria of going to New Zealand, wow, you know, it's very boring. So we'll go to various places. I'll drag them, you know, say, let's take a taxi and go here and there, and let's make our lives interesting. So they'll just sit in the taxi and look very bored. But the moment they see the taxi driver is from anywhere from South Asia, and if they can speak in Punjabi, my God, they just launch off. So there are these islands of conversations immediately about, oh, tusi kithe aayo, and all of that kind of language, and they come alive. And then this conversation that I hear, you know, like it gives me insights into my parents' pain, their longing, their dreams, their aspirations, and their memories and everything. And then all of a sudden they become quiet. It's really interesting to be on those journeys of these little islands of memory that come alive with language.
Yes, yes. Now, do they speak only in English with you, or do you have your other languages that
Hindi. No, we speak Hindi.
Hindi,
yeah. But they never speak in Punjabi with me. They speak in Punjabi when they meet a Punjabi taxi driver. And they still look so animated.
Do you know Punjabi?
I do. Yeah, of course I do.
So how come they don't speak to you in Punjabi?
Well, I mean, because I think a lot of refugees who came from Pakistan, and when they arrived in Delhi, they abandoned Punjabi because they wanted to assimilate with mainstream Hindi people, Hindi-speaking people.
Yeah. So many histories and languages, yeah.
How do we find your podcast?
Oh, that podcast? Okay. If you go to my website, like all other aspiring authors, I have books, and then, you know, those tabs. There's one called About. And if you look at About, beneath it, it has interviews, and one of them is, the name of that podcast in which I was in conversation is called The Seen and the Unseen. But you can listen to other interviews too. If you have, the podcast we were just talking about is Alka's, and you want to tell her about that? What is it? What's the name?
Yeah, it's called South Asian Films and Books.
South Asian Films and Books.
Yeah.
I think, Sarji, behind Meg is another gentleman with a question.
There is time,
Sure.
No, I loved many things you said, but there's something bothering me time to time. For example, that part of your definition that the language is somehow my identity, and I like to keep that. In Hindi, my language is Hindi. So in Hindi, there are movements like use of what they call Hinglish, somebody calls it Hindui. Personally, I'm not happy with that. So I like my Hindi as Hindi, and I like to have the Hindi which I write. Now, it's true that quite often I cannot speak Hindi purely. I have to mix up English words. Mixing up Urdu words is quite common. But what do you feel about this thing? Movement in Hindi to change it to Hindui or English or such things?
You know, language cannot be controlled. It's always changing. And we should be open to all kinds of things. It has to be free. What I dislike is when you get on a plane in India and the flight attendants use a language that is so Sanskritized, it's so artificial, it's so heavy. There's nothing of the vernacular Hindi in it. It becomes like, you know, it's all stilted definitions of seat belts and attention and captain, even captains, and, you know, other words for those. It bores the hell out of me. That's not how people live on the street or speak, you know. So that's one thing. The other thing is the mixing is very important. People trying to purify it of, you know, in the same way as purifying the cities of Muslim names, wanting to purify English, Hindi of Urdu influences, that is barbaric. But we should end on a more positive note. What can be the positive note?
Could I actually get you to read the very last paragraph?
Sure.
Because as you put the call out at the start of the talk that when we come back in a year, let's everybody have their hands raised, that we're all journaling
Okay,
away.
good.
And this is quite an inspirational parting note, I feel.
Okay. This paragraph is actually also, you can find it if you Google my name and New York. It appeared in New York Times Magazine in an article on how to keep a check mark. Every day, at the end of the day, I want to make a check mark. So here's the paragraph. I'm a writer, so every day I write. The days I'm given are only for writing. Maybe you are a writer too. Maybe you are not. The point still stands. The mark you make in your journal is more important than whatever comes of the daily task whose completion you're recording. The first represents actual living, the second merely a life. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maeve.
Okay, well, thank you all.
And thanks to both of you for a wonderful session. That was a great journey.